This dude is smart, bro.
Oh,
that's right.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Our examiner is well known to regular viewers of this program. He is as distinguished as a left-wing economist can hope to become. Professor Robert Cashman teaches at Lehman College. He is at the University of New York. He is the author of a number of books, including Greed is Not Enough.
Nothing has separated the Jewish and the black community more in the last generation than this issue of affirmative action, which for critical Jews invariably is termed quotas rather than affirmative action.
Well, they're different.
What?
They are different.
They are different. Let me in fact suggest this as a hypothesis. I'd be interested in your comment. Has there not been throughout our history a whole set of formal, informal, affirmative actions for white males, for Episcopalians, for graduates of Ivy League colleges, pardoning your presence, Mr. Buckley, has there not, in fact,
why not him?
In clubs, I suppose, I'm not sure whether I should include myself. I went to Columbia.
Oh, yes.
What about clubs like the Century Association in this city, the Bohemian Grove, the Duquesne Club, the various clubs which are engaged in
Okay, so prior to even going deeper into this video, I do think affirmative action can be a good thing. However, the way it's looked at in America now, or the way that it's operating now, could possibly use some work. So I'm interested to see like what Thomas Sowell has to say about affirmative action. It seems like just based off the title of the video, he doesn't support it. And I believe this man is asking, since you don't support affirmative action, what are your opinion on Ivy League schools or communities that disproportionately aid white Americans or white men? I don't necessarily understand where he's coming from since he brought up Ivy Leagues, but let's get into the video. I mean, I'm not going to say too much. I just want to listen to it, honestly.
Club, the various clubs which are engaged in affirmative action for limited groups of their own members. In all of these clubs, important business is transacted to the benefit of the members and to the exclusion of people who are not members. We've had affirmative action of all kinds in this country addressed to the interest of the stronger groups. Now, comes a moment in our history when affirmative action, for a bit, is advanced for the benefit of groups which have been traditionally at the short end of the distribution of good things in our society. And there is considerable revulsion against it. Isn't this just a bit of historical justice that's being...
No, I hate when people say historical justice. Here's the thing. If you support affirmative action or you believe affirmative action should exist, which I'm not going to say my opinion on as of yet, your reasoning behind it shouldn't be, in my opinion, well, they got to do it, so we got to do it. That's not moral to me, in my opinion. It's not really a moral justification of having affirmative action. You're not even really supporting affirmative action at that point. You're kind of just supporting revenge.
I'm afraid I simply do not see the justice in making people who are badly off worse off in the name of advancing them.
You contrast the black experience in the 1960s and the 1970s. Well, now if I were to interpret the difference, I'd be inclined to point to certain phenomena. Notably, the oil shock in 1973, the second oil shock in 1979, the sharp recession in 74, 75.
That's before, way before my time.
Recession in 79, 80.
Way before my time.
And in fact, what this suggests to me is that the gains of affirmative action are extraordinarily precarious if you run an economy at low levels of activity. That, of course, affirmative action isn't enough by itself. It would be foolish for anybody, even on my side of the issue, to argue that. But I would suggest to you that it's a bad comparison, because the 60s were a period of expansion, with or without affirmative action, given the presence of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, given the 1954 Brown decision, and the general climate of opinion, opportunities for minority communities and a majority community, women.
Question, Mr. Cashman?
What?
Question, please.
Well, yes,
rambling.
I will come to a question. It's always possible to put speeches into question form. In fact, do you really think, these considerations taken into mind, that the 70s disproved the efficacy of affirmative action?
I think that when one makes a profound change in a society, arousing enormous passions across the board, that the burden of proof should be on those who think that this is beneficial. Because I have been listening very carefully, and you have yet to hear the benefit to disadvantaged blacks that has been empirically discovered after affirmative action.
Well, how quickly do you expect the changes? You know, we're impatient as a people. In fact, as I understand one of your...
We've had dramatic changes in the other direction, Mr. Cashman. For instance,
Oh, but I attribute them to other causes, you say.
Sex.
I attribute the effects to other causes, largely to the economic disorders of the 1970s. The problems have been of long standing in our society. The remedy of affirmative action is a novel one. The University of California, when it presented an affirmative action plan, proposed to make about half a dozen.
I honestly never thought about it that way. Thomas Sowell, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, he kind of made a good point. He said, where's the evidence showing that affirmative action is working? And if you really think about it, that's a solid point to make, because as African Americans, I'm not going to say our race is downgrading, because it's not, but our incomes aren't really improving as a whole. Our marriage rates aren't really improving as a whole. Our children out of wedlock aren't really improving as a whole. And I may be ignorant to some things, because not everyone knows everything. I may be ignorant to some things. However, for him to say that is a very justified statement. Where's the evidence showing that affirmative action is actually working?
Women and blacks full professors in about 20 years, as I recall the program.
There were various fractions of people who would have become things in various periods of time.
Various what?
Various fractions. They would add 3.5 more women and things like that. And I was always fascinated. I had some suggestions of the people I thought would be right for the 0.5. But these suggestions were not well received. No, but it's fascinating that I see this happening in all sorts of issues, from Federal Reserve policies on across the board, that you say, here's this wonderful program, and it will do wonderful things. And the burden of proof is on others to show that it will not do those things. And no matter how long it's been going on.
It's not long enough.
It's never long enough. If it failed, there just wasn't enough commitment. The budget wasn't big enough, should have had a larger staff, wider powers. But there is never any sense of a burden of proof on you to say, when you've made this change that has caused such furor in this country and has gotten people at each other's throats, including people who have been allies in the past, such as blacks and the Jews, there is never any sense of a need for you to advance the empirical evidence to support what you've been doing.
Oh,
that's right.
Contrary.
That's true. That's true, because he made a point. He said, how long, we're an impatient people. That's what he said. But he just said, okay, when are you going to show the evidence saying affirmative action works? And if you have no intent of showing the said evidence, how could you say affirmative action should remain in place? That's a good question. He didn't say it exactly like that, but that's what I got from it. And that's a good point. Referring back to what I said earlier, I said I was going to give my opinions on affirmative action. I believe, based off of what I know about it, I believe affirmative action as some form should exist. Because some people are unequally represented. So it could improve equity among the Americans. However, I don't necessarily believe it should be based on race. I don't believe it should be based on race. I think it should be more so based on your economic standing in America. I think that just makes more sense. Because if we're being honest, when it comes to affirmative action, if you are not a lower income African American household, you will get more of an unfair advantage than a Caucasian family who is low income. And that's just what it is. I know Barack Obama kind of touched on that when he was president. His thoughts on affirmative action. He kind of has similar views to me. He believes it should exist. However, when it comes to just focusing on race, and you could say, oh, it doesn't focus on race. Its backbone is race. I looked it up, and it varies depending on institution to institution. So it's not even 100% decided by the government. An institution can decide what they want to focus on, which could be a little biased too. However, I do think it should more so focus on economic standing, because if it doesn't, if you are an affluent African-American family, you will get unfair advantage over a non-affluent Caucasian family, which kind of contradicts the whole meaning of affirmative action, to have equal playing field.
Dr. Sowell, I'm perfectly willing to have other people collect empirical evidence. That's not my bag. But I'm perfectly happy to subject the affirmative action policies to reasonable statistical evaluation, given a sufficient period.
Well, what is a sufficient? Because you said for a bit. And now we're talking about a sufficient period, and I have difficulty with these. What temporal units are we talking about?
You need to quantify what you're saying.
I would think of 20 to 25 years as a reasonable period, because we're talking, after all, among other things, about the progress of just hired law firm associates up to the grandeur of partners.
Wait, most blacks are not about to become law firm associates. The real problem is the kid in the South Bronx who has a tough time getting his first job as an unskilled worker because the employer is scared to hire him, because if he doesn't work out and he fires him, he may have to deal with the NAACP, with the EEOC, and God knows who else.
Oh, I have so simple a remedy for that, Mr. Sowell.
Oh,
I'm happy
wonderful.
to share it. All we need to do is to revert to the...
I did not know affirmative action affected like actual jobs. I thought it was primarily for colleges, honestly. I thought it was just for colleges. But it's for jobs too. Like you need to, that doesn't really make sense. Whatever. I don't know.
Well, I'm happy to share it. All we need to do is to revert to the goals of the Humphrey Hawkins Balanced Growth and Full Employment Act.
Gee,
and then
why didn't I think of that?
Well, that's because you were tired from talking earlier. But if in fact we ran the economy at very high levels of employment, employers would be less picky, less choosy, as they were during the Second World War. I don't advocate World War III as a solution to the problem. Good. But it is nevertheless...
Shall I answer the Humphrey Hawkins thing? What Humphrey Hawkins represents is doing what we've done in the public schools, promoting people along just because of, it's time for them to be promoted or passed along. And now, instead of confining this to the educational system, in which it's been a total disaster, we're now going to extend this into the marketplace so that people will be hired, regardless of other kinds of considerations, and passed along. That at no point will they be forced to meet any kind of standards.
Portugal has Humphrey Hawkins.
Do they?
And the highest per capita debt in the world.
Well, let me hark
All in
back...
9 years. They didn't even take 25 years.
I see.
Let me hark back to World War II, where I have the advantage of
talking about World War
chronological
II?
antiquity to help
Not
me.
that
I can
much,
recall
really.
it. The fact is that during the Second World War, 13 million people were in uniform, I among them by invitation of a group of my neighbors. And at the same time as we supported a massive military effort, we actually improved the civilian standard of life during the Second World War. Now, how did we do it? We drew into the labor force all kinds of people who had been regarded as unemployable for assorted reasons, good and indifferent, bad perhaps. But it turned out that when there was a shortage of people, instead of a shortage of jobs, employers became ingenious.
All right, let me take that point, you see, because I have made the argument, you see, that the minimum wage law tends to make it tougher for minorities to be employed. Then, by extension, one would say, conversely, a maximum wage law would make it easier. And what we had in World War II was a maximum wage law. And therefore, we had price and wage controls. And therefore, we had a chronic shortage of labor across the board. And under those conditions, women, minorities, etc., were hired in unusual rates. So I'm happy to see you agreeing with the paradigm that I was taught at Chicago, that indeed the number of jobs and people and so forth are all functions of price.
Chicago has had a malignant influence.
Not nearly as much as it should have.
It's also true that after the war, there were 9% black teenagers unemployed, and now that figure is more like 40%. And that's supposed to be after 40 years of progress under your system.
Given a choice, would you rather have...
He's right. And one thing I like about, I don't know his name, this guy right here who's talking to Thomas Sowell, is that he is saying that during World War II, where his system was in effect, the United States economy was booming, where like you didn't have to have a shortage of jobs, you had a shortage of workers. The economy was booming, people were happier. That's what he's saying. However, to counter that argument, I have a question. Why is unemployment for African American teenagers up compared to then? You could say that, well, most people are in college, so they aren't employed. But I just want to know, what would his answer be to that? Like, why aren't we as a people under this system improving? Because he said a time frame is 25 years. World War II was over 25 years ago. I genuinely want to know, like, what thoughts would you have on why it's not improving? It looks like you're losing the battle right now.
The private price setters or public price setters in markets which are less than competitive.
Well, since I have not seen these enormous numbers of private price setters that you and Professor Galbraith have been discovering for so many years, despite having read your books on this subject, I really have nothing to compare.
Well,
where I see prices set, I see them set by the government.
Only? Really?
Occasionally a few electrical contractors get together and they end up, you know.
But it's against the law.
It's against the law. I think it ought to stay against the law.
We call it criminal.
That's right. That's right. I mean, we have laws against murder, but murders take place anyway.
How do you interpret the behavior of the major automobile producers in 1979 and 1980, dreadful sales years? In both of those years, General Motors and its colleagues raised automobile prices. This is not how they do it on 7th Avenue when the garment business is bad.
I am tempted to say that after 25 years of that, I'll be happy to give you my answer, since presumably this is the magic number from which we do our empirical study. And like you, I haven't bothered to keep up with the automobile industry.
This dude is smart, bro. Like, he is genuinely, he might be a genius. I'm not even saying that based off of what, like, the facts he's saying. I'm saying that just by the way he communicates. He said, well, I'll tell you that after 25 years. That was a good one.
Wait 25 years for you if you'll wait 25 years.
Oh, it'll be a wonderful, something to look forward to.
Well, I think one obvious commentary is that a lot of fewer people bought cars. And also there was automatic indexation of wages.
Yes, I must say the thing that Galbraith strikes me as his theories in general is showing the utter imperviousness to empirical data, that the affluent society told us that we reached a level of affluence at which income distribution questions were no longer going to be important. We then ended upon a quarter of a century of the most intense interest in income distribution questions in the history of the United States. He informed us about the industries of the country, that now we had corporations that were immortal and that really didn't obey the rules laid down in such terrible places as Chicago because they were invulnerable to the marketplace.
Half of them went bankrupt.
W.T. Grant got wiped out. The Graflex Corporation used to supply 80% of all press cameras. They are now nowhere to be seen on the landscape. Neither would Chrysler be anywhere on the landscape but for the intervention in which so many liberals joined. You know, empirical evidence does matter.
It does. I see less of it than you do.
I'm willing to believe that because you've said so. I've been asking you for it and I haven't gotten any of it. So I'm perfectly willing to agree with you on that.
But
Gentlemen, we have 1 minute.
The major piece of empirical evidence that I think you've cited this hour has really been the contrast between the 60s and the 70s.
No, it's been the contrast between well-off people and badly off people. And that's true in other countries as well, that in Malaysia, where they've had affirmative action for the same amount of time, it's had the same results. It has done nothing for the poor Malays. The lowest level of Malays receive a smaller percentage of all the income received by Malays today than before this program was put into effect, as is true of blacks in the United States.
Is it worthless to do something for anybody but the very poor?
I would like to see the well-off take care of themselves. If they can't, who can?
Thank you very much.
I don't even know what to say, man. That was deep. The problem I have with this video is that he's saying he doesn't see a lot of empirical evidence. And that's kind of scary to me because if you're a supporter of affirmative action and one of the smartest, he seems pretty smart. He went to Columbia or something. Says, well, I don't really see that much evidence supporting it, but I still think it should work. You should be worried because this is not a game. This is literally your life. A person who's probably lobbying for affirmative action or having these type of meetings for affirmative action literally just said, I don't really see much evidence that supports it or that says we should be doing affirmative action, but I still think we should do it. Whereas someone else is saying, no, evidence is showing that affirmative action is not helping. We need to stop doing it. And you're saying, well, evidence is showing that, but we should still do it. Whether you support affirmative action or not, that is kind of scary. You should be closer to the side that shows the evidence is there. Like, that's where you should be at, but I digress. If you have any other suggestions for me to do, comment them down below. And I'll see you on the next one.